Beneath the earth lie places that guard their secrets fiercely, terrain that has consumed entire armies, monuments carved with impossible precision, and artifacts that challenge the very foundations of our history. These are not legends. These are genuine, unexplained discoveries that have baffled experts for generations. Who were the builders, and how did they achieve such feats with ancient tools? The greatest question remains, what else is still out there, waiting to be found? From lost cities reclaimed by the earth to relics that seem to belong to another world, tonight we journey into the heart of archaeology's greatest enigmas. And whether you're watching this intently, or just have it on in the background while you work, study, or drift off to sleep, we're happy to have you along for the ride. We're always curious to see how far these stories travel. Let us know in the comments, what corner of the earth are you in, and what time is it there? Now grab a snack, get comfortable, and let's dig into the archaeological mysteries that history can't explain. In the northwest corner of modern-day Turkey, near the Dardanelles, where Europe meets Asia and the land meets the Aegean winds, stands a hill called Hisarlik. Hisarlik is a low, uneven hill, covered in dry grass and scattered stones. From a distance, it blends into the plains, nothing grand or striking at all. Yet beneath that quiet surface, whole civilizations once rose and fell. A city called Troy, or rather a series of Troys, layered through time, built, destroyed, and born again. And at its heart, a mystery that has captivated the world for more than 3,000 years. Did the Trojan War really happen? Or was it simply a story that outgrew its truth? We all know the legend, a Greek fleet crossing the wine-dark sea to lay siege to the proud city of Troy. A conflict said to have lasted 10 years, filled with duels, deception, and divine intervention. At its core, the wrath of Achilles, fierce and unrelenting, and the fate of Helen, whose beauty was said to have launched 1,000 ships. It's a story every generation retells in its own way, carved into marble, painted on pottery, and recited by poets long after the city itself turned to dust. Homer's Iliad gave it voice, turning memory into myth, and myth into something like history. But the question still lingers, how much of it was real? Was there truly a war fought for a woman, a city that fell to cunning and fire? Or has time stitched together fragments of truth and legend into a tale too powerful to let go? For centuries, scholars debated whether Troy ever existed at all. To many, it was nothing more than a legend, a story spun by poets, embroidered with gods, monsters, and impossible heroes. After all, Homer's Iliad wasn't a historical record. It was an epic poem composed centuries after the events it described. Still, the question lingered. Could there have been a real city behind the myth? A place that sparked a story so enduring it survived thousands of years. In the 19th century, that question began to shift from speculation to discovery. In 1870, a German businessman turned self-taught archaeologist named Heinrich Schliemann arrived in northwestern Turkey, near a small village called Hisarlik. Guided more by Homer's verses than by science, Schliemann was convinced he could find the real Troy, the city of kings, warriors, and fallen walls. His excavation began as an act of obsession, but what he uncovered would change history. Beneath the dry earth of Hisarlik, Schliemann revealed the ruins of a great fortified city, its massive stone walls and gates still standing after thousands of years. The site overlooked a crucial waterway, the Dardanelles, connecting the Aegean and the Black Sea, a location of immense strategic value in the ancient world. It seemed for a moment that Homer's legend had finally found its home, but the discovery came with a twist. As Schliemann dug deeper, he realized the site wasn't the remains of a single city, but of many, built one atop another, over centuries. 9 distinct layers of habitation emerged, each representing a different era of human life, from the early Bronze Age to the Roman period. Some layers showed signs of wealth and fortification, others of fire and sudden destruction. It was clear that Hisarlik had witnessed not one, but several cycles of rise and ruin. So the mystery only deepened. Which of these buried cities, if any, was Homer's Troy? Was it one of the earliest layers, a Bronze Age city long forgotten, or a later one, closer to the world Homer knew. Among the many layers uncovered at Hisarlik, two in particular have drawn the most attention from archaeologists, Troy 7 and Troy 7a. Both date roughly between 1700 and 1200 BC, placing them squarely within the time frame of the events described in Homer's Iliad. These layers, more than any others, seem to whisper the echoes of that legendary war. The first, Troy 7, was a magnificent city for its time. It had vast stone fortifications, towers, and carefully laid streets, signs of wealth, organisation, and power. The architecture alone suggested a place of great importance, possibly the capital of a thriving kingdom controlling trade across the Dardanelles. Yet its story ended abruptly. The city's walls show cracks not of battle, but of nature, evidence of a massive earthquake that may have brought the city to its knees. No clear signs of warfare were found in its ruins, only the quiet devastation left by the shifting earth. But not long after, the city rose again, Troy 7a, built directly on top of the ruins of the fallen one. This version of Troy was different, denser, more cramped, almost as if its people were preparing for danger. Storage jars were found buried into the floors of houses, perhaps an attempt to preserve food during siege or scarcity. The walls were hastily repaired, stronger but rougher, and in its final destruction layer, archaeologists found unmistakable traces of fire and sudden ruin. Many human remains were discovered in positions suggesting chaos and urgency. Bodies left unburied or quickly covered beneath collapsed debris. Could this have been the war that gave rise to the legend? It's tempting to believe so. The timing, the destruction, the signs of conflict, they all seem to fit. But archaeology is a patient, stubborn field, and the evidence remains frustratingly silent. There are no inscriptions naming Priam or Hector, no relics tied to Greek warriors, no weapon etched with the name of Achilles. The story the ground tells is real, but incomplete, fragments of fire and ruin without the voices that once lived through them. Archaeology speaks softly, offering fragments, not answers. What we uncover are traces, not truths. Some historians believe that Homer's Iliad may preserve a distant memory of a real conflict, one that might have taken place around 1250 BC, during a time of immense turmoil across the eastern Mediterranean. This was an age of collapse, when great powers like the Hittites, the Mycenaeans, and others fell into ruin. Trade networks disintegrated, cities burned, and once thriving kingdoms vanished almost overnight. It was a time of chaos, migration, and shifting alliances. Could Troy have been part of that wider wave of destruction? Possibly. Some scholars suggest that the Greeks, known then as the Achaeans, may indeed have launched a campaign against a rival city in Anatolia. If so, it was likely over trade, territory, or power, not over the abduction of a queen. The Helen of legend may be pure invention, a poetic symbol crafted to make sense of a conflict whose real causes were far more political and far less romantic. And then comes the mystery of Homer himself. The Iliad was composed around the 8th century BC, roughly 4 or 5 centuries after the supposed war it describes. Was Homer recording ancient memories passed down through generations of oral storytelling? Or was he creating something entirely new, weaving fragments of fading history into a tapestry of myth, heroism, and divine drama? We may never know. No earlier written versions of the story survive. The texts we have were copied and recopied centuries later, their words shaped and reshaped by countless hands. Even within the poem, time seems to blur. Homer's Bronze Age warriors wield iron weapons. Chariots are described in ways that don't match their real use in battle. The world of the Iliad isn't a snapshot of one era, it's a patchwork, part memory, part imagination, and part timeless human truth. And then, there's the matter of the famous wooden horse. The image is iconic, a towering construct of timber, wheels creaking, soldiers hidden in its hollow belly. Yet, curiously, Homer never mentions it in the Iliad. The story appears centuries later, told by Virgil in his Aeneid and echoed in the works of later poets. So, what was it really? Could it have been a metaphor, born not of oak and nails, but of imagination and memory? Some scholars think it may have referred to a siege engine, a towering ram or structure that, over centuries of retelling, transformed into the mythical horse of deception. Others whisper that it might have been a ship, its name or figurehead mistaken in translation and mythologized over time, and then there are those who see it as a symbol of earthquake and ruin, for horses were sacred to Poseidon, god of the sea, and of quakes. Perhaps it was not a literal object at all, but a story designed to capture the essence of victory through cunning, part truth, part symbol, part illusion. Because the truth is, there may have been many Troys and many wars. The stones are real, the scars are ancient, but the story they tell is still unfinished. Did the Trojan War ever truly happen? Or is it a mirror, reflecting our own hunger for meaning, our need for heroes, for betrayal, for beauty worth fighting for? Maybe the Iliad endures, not because it tells us what happened, but because it tells us who we are. Creatures who crave narrative, who build myths to make sense of chaos, who turn dust and ruin into legend. And somewhere, between archaeology and poetry, between memory and myth, the truth still waits, not buried under the soil of Hisarlik, but in that quiet space between what we remember and what we long to believe. The early shores of America hold one of history's most haunting mysteries, the lost colony of Roanoke. An entire settlement vanished, consumed by time and silence. Leaving behind nothing but questions, it stands as one of the earliest and most enduring enigmas in American history, a riddle that has kept historians and archaeologists alike, chasing fragments of truth, still asking what really happened to an entire colony of settlers. The story begins in 1587, in the golden age of Elizabethan exploration, an era when wooden ships carried the dreams of an empire across untamed oceans. Under the bold vision and patronage of Sir Walter Raleigh, a band of English settlers set sail from the familiar shores of England toward the promise and peril of the New World. After weeks of perilous travel across the Atlantic's restless waters, they arrived at Roanoke Island, a remote outpost nestled off the coast of what is now North Carolina. The air was thick with salt and possibility. Under the steady command of Governor John White, these men, women, and children sought to carve a new beginning from wilderness and uncertainty. Their goal was ambitious, to build a permanent English settlement that would anchor their nation's claim to the Americas and open the door to trade, influence, and glory. Roanoke's story didn't begin in 1587. The island had already tasted the weight of English ambition 2 years earlier in 1585, when the first colonists arrived with high hopes and left in defeat. That early settlement collapsed under the strain of unforgiving weather, scarce supplies, and uneasy relations with the indigenous peoples whose lands they had entered. The survivors limped back to England, their dreams of empire reduced to whispers of hunger and despair, but failure did not dull England's hunger for discovery. In July 1587, a new expedition, led by Governor John White, set sail once more for Roanoke. This time it wasn't soldiers or adventurers who came ashore, but families, men, women, and children, determined to build lives, not just history. They set to work quickly, raising crude shelters, sowing seeds in the sandy soil, and trying to forge peace with the native tribes nearby. There was optimism in the air, fragile, yet bright, as if a new dawn had broken over the untamed coast. It was on this remote, uncertain frontier that Virginia Dare came into the world, the first English child born in the Americas. Her birth was more than a moment of joy, it was a beacon. To the weary settlers, she represented the dawn of a new English generation, a living promise that their venture might endure. But the promise soon faltered beneath the weight of reality. The settlers' fragile harmony with the surrounding indigenous tribes began to unravel. What had started with cautious exchanges and uneasy truces gave way to suspicion and hostility. Isolation grew heavier. The land that had once seemed rich with opportunity turned wild and unyielding. Hunger soon followed. Supplies dwindled faster than expected, and the once hopeful colony found itself teetering on the edge of starvation. The sea that had carried them to this new world now cut them off from salvation. Governor John White, torn between duty and dread, made the agonizing choice to return to England for help. He left behind his family, his people, and his dream, trusting that his absence would save them all. Before departing, he gave them one last instruction. Should they relocate, they were to carve the name of their new settlement onto a tree or post. If they were driven away by danger, they were to add a cross beside it, a code meant to outlast disaster, a final lifeline through silence. Governor John White's voyage back to England was meant to be a short absence, a swift journey for supplies and reinforcements before returning to his fledgling colony. But destiny, as ever, had other designs. The world beyond Roanoke erupted into chaos. England, locked in a bitter rivalry with Spain, faced the looming threat of the Spanish Armada. Every available ship was conscripted for war, every sailor called to defend the crown. White's pleas to return to his people were drowned beneath the thunder of cannons and the fever of national survival. What should have been a few months stretched into 3 long, unforgiving years. When at last he secured passage and set sail once more, the ocean that once carried hope now seemed heavy with foreboding. In August of 1590, White finally sighted the familiar outline of Roanoke Island. His heart must have raced. His daughter, his granddaughter, Virginia Dare, his colony, all waiting for his return. But as his feet touched the shore, that hope shattered. The settlement stood in ghostly stillness. Houses were gone, or neatly dismantled, as though packed away by unseen hands. The protective palisade remained, but within its walls there was no life, no voices, no footprints, no smoke curling from a single hearth. There were no signs of violence, no bodies, no chaos. The colony had not fallen, it had departed. Everything suggested a careful, intentional evacuation. But to where and why? The silence that met John White on that lonely shore was almost alive, pressing against him with the weight of absence. The wind moved through the trees like a whisper of what once was, carrying only one enduring question. Where had they gone? The only clues the lost colony left behind were a handful of markings, cryptic, almost desperate messages carved into the bones of the settlement itself. On one weathered post, the word Croatoan was deeply inscribed. Nearby, on a tree, just 3 letters. CRO. Governor White recognized the word immediately. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, modern-day Hatteras, home to a tribe of indigenous people who had once been friendly toward the English. For a fleeting moment, hope returned. Perhaps the colonists had simply moved, seeking safer ground and new allies. But the ocean had other plans. Each attempt to reach Croatoan Island was beaten back by violent winds and unrelenting storms. The sea seemed to guard its secrets with fury. Supplies dwindled, morale crumbled, and White was finally forced to turn back, heartbroken, defeated, and burdened with a mystery that would never let him rest. He returned to England empty-handed. No proof of life, no remains, only those carved words left behind like a whisper through time. Over the centuries, the mystery of Roanoke has refused to fade. Scholars have scoured coastlines, divers have searched the seabed, and archaeologists have followed every trace. Some believe the settlers joined the Croatoan tribe, blending into native life and disappearing by choice. Others whisper of raids, famine, disease, or curses carried on the wind. But none of it has ever been proven. The lost colony remains just a lost haunting question carved in wood echoing across 4 centuries of silence. One of the most compelling theories holds that the Roanoke colonists, starving, isolated, and surrounded by uncertainty, made the only choice left to them: survival through assimilation. They may have sought refuge among nearby indigenous tribes, slowly integrating into their societies, and vanishing not through violence, but through adaptation. Archaeological discoveries seem to whisper fragments of this truth. English tools buried in native settlements, European beads among tribal relics, hints of shared language and customs that suggest a quiet blending of worlds. If this was their fate, it would mean the colony did not perish. It transformed, its story absorbed into another culture's living memory. Yet, as with all mysteries, shadows persist. Another enduring theory suggests that the settlers abandoned the coast entirely, venturing inland in search of food, safety, or a stronger position. Early colonial accounts and oral histories from native tribes speak of pale-skinned newcomers appearing far from the coast. Ghosts of Roanoke, perhaps, who had walked deeper into the wilderness and never looked back. But proof remains elusive. No settlement has been found, no map marks their final home. Every artifact uncovered raises more questions than it answers. The fate of the colonists drifts just beyond reach, part history, part haunting. On March 4th, 1918, beneath tranquil skies off the coast of Barbados, the USS Cyclops embarked on its final voyage. Having journeyed thousands of miles from Brazil, the massive naval collier carried a critical wartime cargo, over 10,000 tons of manganese ore, essential for producing hardened steel. With 306 souls aboard, sailors, marines and civilians, the ship set course for Baltimore only to disappear without a whisper. Conditions were ideal, calm seas, clear skies, no hint of danger. Yet no distress signal was ever transmitted. When the Cyclops failed to arrive, the Navy initially dismissed concerns, attributing the delay to wartime logistical hiccups. But as days stretched into weeks with no sightings at any port, unease solidified into dread. Search parties scoured the Atlantic along the ship's planned route. They found nothing, no debris, no lifeboats, no bodies. The Atlantic, it seemed, had simply devoured the ship whole. What made the story even more unsettling was that the Cyclops wasn't just any ordinary transport vessel. It was a massive Proteus-class collier, stretching nearly 550 feet long, strong, steady, and trusted. Since 1910, it had sailed confidently on missions across the world, from the Caribbean to the American East Coast. It had its quirks, but nothing that hinted at the mystery to come. When it vanished, there were no storms, no reports of enemy submarines, nothing but silence, as if the ocean had simply erased it. In the months that followed, whispers began surfacing from ports the Cyclops had visited before it disappeared. Dockworkers in Rio de Janeiro remembered the ship sitting oddly low in the water, lower than other colliers of its kind. Some suspected the manganese ore had been unevenly loaded, straining the ship's balance. Naval engineers later suggested that even a slight imbalance, stretched over a long voyage, could have stressed the hull until a single swell caused catastrophic failure. But even that explanation felt incomplete. How could such a massive ship collapse so suddenly without sending a single distress signal? Years later, when wartime records were revisited, investigators discovered that the area where the Cyclops was last seen was riddled with uncharted shoals and deep-sea trenches, some plunging thousands of feet into darkness. If the ship had gone down there, its sheer weight and steel hull might have dragged it swiftly into the abyss, leaving no wreckage behind. Captain George W. Worley, the man at the helm of the Cyclops, became a figure of deep suspicion in the wake of the ship's disappearance. Described by some as erratic and by others as unnervingly secretive, Worley carried a past that was anything but ordinary. He had once served under a different name and, by most accounts, was not beloved by his crew. Sailors who'd endured previous voyages with him told strange tales, of him pacing the decks in his underwear, cane in hand, muttering under his breath. In the weeks before the ship vanished, tensions reportedly ran high. There were arguments, disciplinary problems, and a growing sense of unease among the crew. Some wondered whether the captain had finally snapped, but even if he had, how could one man's instability cause an entire ship to vanish without a trace? Theories of sabotage surfaced next. Perhaps a German sympathizer had infiltrated the vessel, or someone had tampered with the hull. Yet no proof was ever found. Others pointed to the cargo itself, more than 10,000 tons of dense manganese ore. If it shifted suddenly in rough waters, it could have caused the Cyclops to capsize in seconds. But that still didn't explain the silence. The ship had a functioning radio. Why hadn't anyone sent an SOS? The Cyclops became one of the earliest and most chilling mysteries associated with what would later be known as the Bermuda Triangle, a region between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, long whispered about for its strange vanishings. Even the US Navy, usually dismissive of superstition, never managed to produce a clear explanation. Officially, the ship's fate remains listed as lost due to unknown causes. Adding to the unease, decades later, two of the Cyclops' sister ships, the Proteus and the Nereus, also vanished under eerily similar circumstances. Both carried the same type of ore, both sailed through nearby waters, and both disappeared without a single distress call. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Had the design of the ships concealed a fatal flaw, or was something far stranger haunting those waters? No final logs were ever found. No fragments of hull. Not even a single life preserver. It was as if the Atlantic itself had swallowed the ship whole, then smoothed over the surface, leaving behind only silence and speculation. The Navy launched inquiries. Committees sifted through every scrap of evidence, every rumour, every log entry. Yet more than a century later, nothing tangible has ever surfaced. No answers, only echoes. In time, a handful of forgotten letters from the Cyclops crew families resurfaced in naval archives, adding a shadowy twist to the story. Some of the men had sent cryptic notes from earlier ports, alluding to unrest aboard the ship. One sailor wrote ominously, "Things are not as they seem. Don't believe what you read if bad news comes." Another hinted that they had received orders that make no sense, suggesting their course might have been quietly changed before departing Barbados. Though unverifiable, these fragments have fueled speculation that the Cyclops' final journey might not have been the one officially recorded, that its disappearance could have been part of a secret mission, or perhaps a plan designed to ensure the ship never came back at all. What makes the Cyclops tragedy so haunting isn't just its scale, the size of the ship, or the 300 souls lost, but the void it left behind. There was no distress call, no debris, no sound, just an unbroken silence stretching across calm seas in broad daylight. It's as if the ocean simply reached up, took the Cyclops, and erased every trace of its existence. The sea, after all, keeps many secrets, but few as total, as quiet, or as unnervingly perfect as this one. In the spring of 334 BC, a young conqueror, Alexander of Macedon, led his army across the narrow waters dividing Europe and Asia, stepping not just into Asia Minor, but into legend itself. He was barely 22, commanding a force smaller than many of his foes, yet carried an ambition vast enough to redraw the world. His first true trial came at the Granicus River, where the Persian satraps stood ready to crush this bold intrusion. What unfolded was a violent ballet, horses thrashing in the current, swords flashing under the Anatolian sun, and Alexander himself nearly struck down as he led the charge. Against all odds, the Macedonians triumphed, shattering the Persian defence and opening the path deeper into Asia. Chroniclers like Arrian, Plutarch, and Diodorus immortalised the day, the valour, the tactics, the king's brush with death. Yet beneath those gleaming accounts, history whispers of something stranger. In the quiet aftermath of the Battle of Granicus, a subtle mystery began to take shape. A number of Alexander's soldiers seemed to vanish from the record entirely. They weren't listed among the dead, nor did they appear in rosters for the campaigns that followed. It was as if, after the victory, they had stepped off the pages of history and onto some unseen path of their own. Some ancient writers hinted at a practical explanation, that Alexander left small garrisons in the cities newly brought under his rule. These detachments were meant to hold the land, govern the locals, and keep the king's influence alive even as his army pressed onward. Yet Alexander's approach was different from the conquerors who came before him. He didn't merely subjugate, he assimilated. Instead of looting and leaving, he founded new settlements, renamed existing towns, and seeded them with Macedonian and Greek soldiers, who doubled as administrators, merchants, and defenders. Over time, those men may have settled among the locals, taken wives, and built lives far from the marching drums of conquest. If so, their disappearance wasn't a vanishing, it was an absorption, a quiet melting of conquerors into the conquered. The early stages of Alexander's campaign were ripe with opportunity, a time when cities across Asia Minor were being reborn under a new flag. Some of these towns carried the familiar rhythm of Greek culture, others pulsed with the distinctly Persian way of life, but all at once they were thrust under Macedonian rule, their fates rewritten by the ambitions of a young conqueror. It's here, amid this sweeping transformation, that the trail of Alexander's missing soldiers fades into shadow. The men who vanished from the army rosters after Granicus may have been stationed in these captured cities, charged with holding order in a newly claimed world, and yet history offers nothing beyond whispers. No surviving records, no memorial stones, etched with their names, only silence. If they remain behind, it's easy to imagine how they might have dissolved into the rhythm of local life, marrying, trading, teaching, ruling. Soldiers turned settlers, conquerors turned citizens, their Greek tongues mingling with Persian speech, their customs blending into something entirely new. But then there's the romantic theory, the one that flirts with legend. Perhaps some of these men didn't stay behind at all. Perhaps they wandered beyond the map, venturing eastward into lands unknown, mountains unnamed, and valleys where no Macedonian banner had ever flown. Whether by Alexander's hidden command or their own restless will, they may have carved out a different destiny, far from the empire they helped create. As Alexander's campaign pressed deeper into Central Asia, his army encountered a bewildering mosaic of peoples and cultures. Later, Roman accounts speak of Greek-speaking tribes living in remote regions of modern-day Afghanistan, Pakistan, and even farther across Central Asia. Could these be the descendants of soldiers who, after Granicus or some other early battle, chose to remain behind, settling in newly conquered lands far from their Macedonian homeland? The mystery grows more compelling when we recall that Alexander founded more than 20 cities during his conquests, many bearing his own name. While some were little more than fortified outposts, others flourished into vibrant multi-ethnic communities where Greek, Persian, and local traditions intertwined. In places like Ai-Khanoum in modern Afghanistan, archaeologists have uncovered Greek-style temples, theatres, and inscriptions that endured centuries after Alexander's death. If a detachment of his men had found themselves in a fertile valley or a strategically vital region, it isn't hard to imagine them laying down their spears and planting roots, establishing a permanent Hellenic presence amid the mountains and deserts of the east. Yet local traditions hint at a deeper enigma. Even today, tribes in these regions tell tales of pale-faced warriors who came from the west, strangers who spoke in unfamiliar tongues, and built temples of shining stone. Their names were forgotten, but their blood, some whisper, still flows through the veins of mountain families. Perhaps these vanished soldiers were not lost at all, but reborn, absorbed into the rhythm of new lands. Their legacy preserved not in marble or manuscripts, but in faces, languages, and customs that quietly survived the passage of time. The ancient historians were selective in what they recorded, and the administrative archives of that era survive only in fragments. Yet the sudden disappearance of certain troop numbers after such a defining victory stands out, a gap wide enough to spark centuries of speculation. Later accounts only deepened the intrigue. Travellers and chroniclers from the Roman period reported finding isolated communities that still spoke a Greek dialect, followed Greek customs, and held onto fragments of Hellenic tradition despite being surrounded by entirely different cultures. These curious enclaves, scattered across Central Asia, may have been the remnants of Alexander's garrisons, soldiers who never returned home, but instead built new lives and legacies far from Macedonia. Among the most fascinating of these theories centres on the Kalash people of northern Pakistan. Their unique traditions, lighter features, and distinct cultural practices have long fueled rumours of descent from Alexander's lost men. Linguists and anthropologists have largely dismissed a direct genetic link, yet the legend endures, passed down through generations and still whispered in the valleys of Chitrol. It's less about proof and more about the timeless allure of the idea that fragments of Alexander's army could have left behind living echoes in some of the most remote corners of Asia. Alexander himself may have set this fate in motion. He was known to encourage his men to take local wives, adopt regional customs, and weave the conquered into the fabric of his vision, a single, blended empire of East and West. The policy was controversial, resented by some of his Macedonian officers, yet it reflected his dream of a unified world. If any of the men who vanished after Granicus were early adopters of this vision, they may have been absorbed so completely into local life that they ceased to be recognized as Macedonian soldiers at all. Archaeology offers only scattered hints of what became of them. Excavations in former satrapal capitals and along Alexander's known routes have uncovered Greek-style pottery, inscriptions, and weapons dating to the years immediately after his passage. Intriguingly, some of these artifacts lie far from where the main army was believed to have marched, as if smaller, detached groups had splintered off and wandered deep into the hinterlands. Could these have been remnants of those early detachments, carrying their culture and language far beyond the maps of empire? The mystery only deepens when ancient sources contradict each other. Arrian lists one number of troops for a battle, Curtius Rufus another. When historians line these accounts side by side, the numbers never quite align. Most attribute it to the imprecision of ancient record-keeping, yet these small discrepancies leave enough shadow for theories about missing contingents to take root. What gives the story its enduring allure is the image it conjures, somewhere far from the thunder of Alexander's conquests, a cluster of Macedonian and Greek soldiers settling down, blending with the locals, their armour traded for ploughs or pottery wheels. Perhaps they passed down stories of the young king they once followed across the river at Granicus, the day their world widened beyond imagination, or perhaps within a generation their origins blurred into legend, absorbed by the lands they helped shape. Whether they assimilated, migrated further east, or perished in obscurity, the disappearance of these men remains one of history's quieter enigmas, a riddle stitched into the grand tapestry of Alexander's campaign. It reminds us that even in the best documented moments of antiquity, there are still blank pages, lives that slip through the cracks, leaving behind only faint echoes in the dust of empire. Even now, in the shadowed valleys of Central Asia, local tales whisper of pale-faced strangers who came from the west, warriors who spoke in unknown tongues and brought with them customs no one could explain. Perhaps they were not mere folklore, but the faint after-image of those vanished Macedonians. Every ruin, every fragment of inscription could be a heartbeat from that missing chapter, a reminder that history is not a clean ledger, but a living palimpsest, constantly rewritten by time. And somewhere, buried beneath centuries of wind and silence, may rest the bones of Alexander's lost soldiers, men who traded their king's dream for a new life beneath alien skies. The question is not only where they went, but whether a trace of them still lingers among us, hidden in faces, in customs, or in the unrecorded music of forgotten bloodlines. Beneath the relentless sun of southern Peru, a vast bleached desert plain holds a secret only visible from the heavens. At ground level, the landscape is marked by little more than faint, meandering grooves scratched into the earth, their patterns seemingly random and incoherent. But from the air, a perspective impossible for their ancient creators, these lines transform into one of the world's greatest archaeological mysteries, the Nazca Lines. They are colossal geoglyphs, some stretching over hundreds of feet, depicting a menagerie of stylized animals, spiders, monkeys, hummingbirds, and whales, alongside precise geometric shapes and arrow-straight pathways that march for miles across the plateau. First brought to modern attention by pilots in the 1920s, the sheer scale and precision of these figures stunned the world. Crafted by the Nazca culture between 500 BCE and 500 CE, these immense designs have been miraculously preserved by the desert's unique, windless, and rain-scarce climate. They were created by the simple yet monumental act of removing the dark, sun-baked pebbles from the desert surface to expose the lighter-coloured earth underneath. Mainstream scholarship has woven a tapestry of plausible explanations for the Nazca Lines, though no single thread provides a complete picture. One of the most enduring theories posits an astronomical function for the geoglyphs. Meticulous studies of their alignments suggest that certain lines and trapezoids point toward the sun's position on the solstice horizon, or align with the rising and setting of important stars and constellations. In this interpretation, the desert floor transforms into a vast celestial calendar, a monumental tool for a society whose survival depended on anticipating seasonal shifts. The ability to accurately predict the arrival of life-giving rains or the optimal time for planting would have been nothing short of existential, making the immense labour of creating these alignations a practical and vital investment. A second, and perhaps more resonant, theory roots the lines in ritual and religion. Archaeological evidence from Nazca sites reveals a culture deeply engaged in complex ceremonies, with a recurring emphasis on appealing to deities for water and fertility. From this perspective, the long straight lines and wide trapezoids are not calendars, but sacred pathways. They may have served as processional routes for pilgrims and priests during elaborate rituals, a form of walking prayer across a landscape believed to be imbued with spiritual power. The animal figures, the hummingbird, the spider, the monkey, are not random. In Andean cosmology, these creatures were often powerful symbols, or elu, representing clan lineages or acting as messengers to the gods of water and the underworld. Creating these figures was, therefore, an act of devotion on a colossal scale, a permanent prayer etched into the earth, an offering so immense it could not be ignored. However, the most enduring theories are born from the line's most baffling feature, their invisibility from the ground. This has led to more speculative, yet compelling ideas. If the creators could never see their own work in its full glory, then the audience must have been a non-human one. Were these intricate figures and precise geometries meant as offerings to gods who resided in the heavens, a form of devotional art designed solely for a divine audience? This logic inevitably opens the door to even more enigmatic possibilities. Could they have been intended as signals or landing markers for something else entirely, something that traversed the skies? While such theories are dismissed by mainstream academia, they persist because they directly address the central, illogical nature of the lines themselves. The sheer magnitude of the undertaking is beyond dispute. The largest figures, like the 1,200-foot pelican, are not just drawings, they are feats of landscape engineering. Their execution required the coordinated labour of generations, a sophisticated system of planning, and an intuitive mastery of geometry that allowed them to scale up small models into perfect sprawling forms using little more than wooden stakes and sighting poles. The precision with which these lines maintain their form over miles of uneven terrain is a testament to a skill that borders on the mystical. Thus, we are left with the fundamental, haunting question that eclipses all others. What profound belief or desperate need could compel a people to dedicate centuries of toil to creations they themselves could never behold? Designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Nazca Lines now draw a pilgrimage of a different kind. Scholars armed with laser scanners, travellers seeking wonder, and mystics listening for echoes of an ancient world. Despite these modern attentions, the geoglyphs guard their ultimate secret with the same stoic silence they have maintained for 2 millennia. The debate continues. Were they an astronomical almanac, a sacred text written upon the desert, divine offerings, or signals aimed at the heavens? In our relentless search for a single, satisfying explanation, we may be asking the wrong question. The genius of the Nazca may have been their holistic worldview, one that made no stark division between the sacred and the scientific. To a people living at the mercy of an arid climate, the cycle of water was a divine drama. A prayer for rain was as practical as an irrigation channel, and a ceremony to honour the sun was as crucial as a planting schedule. The lines were likely all these things at once: a ritual pathway walked during a solstice celebration, a territorial marker blessed by the gods, an agricultural calendar that was itself a form of worship. This synthesis, however, does not dissolve all mystery, it only deepens it. Why the hummingbird and not the condor? What profound meaning was encoded in the perfect spiral, or in a line that marches unswerving to the horizon? The desert holds its counsel. The lines remain, a testament etched in dust and stone, a language we can see but cannot fully read. We are left humbled before the ambition of their vision, forever wondering what ultimate truth is still encoded there, waiting for us to learn the grammar of the land and finally understand the message. These ancient people carved not just into the earth, but into time itself. Nearly 2,500 years ago, the sands of time swallowed one of history's greatest enigmas, the lost army of Cambyses. Cambyses II, the fiery son of Cyrus the Great, inherited the vast and glittering Achaemenid Empire in 530 BC, a dominion stretching from the blue edges of the Mediterranean Sea to the golden plains beyond India. As king, Cambyses stood unrivaled, the most powerful man of his age, yet beneath the crown burned a dangerous mix of ambition and fury, a temper so volatile it bordered on madness. He sought not only to rule the known world, but to bend even the divine to his will. Cambyses cemented his power in Egypt with a masterstroke of strategy. At the Battle of Pelusium, he faced the Egyptian pharaoh Psamtik III, and the clash proved decisive. When Psamtik's army retreated behind the fortified walls of Pelusium, they rained projectiles upon the advancing Persians, desperate to repel the invaders. But Cambyses, cunning and ruthless, turned faith itself into a weapon. Knowing that Egyptians revered animals such as cats, dogs, and ibises as sacred, he ordered his troops to drive these creatures toward the city's defences. The Egyptian soldiers, horrified at the thought of harming animals blessed by their gods, hesitated. That single moment of restraint broke their defence. The Persians surged forward, seizing Pelusium and, with it, the fertile heart of the Nile Valley. In one calculated act, Cambyses not only conquered Egypt, he outwitted an entire civilization's belief system. With Egypt now firmly under Persian control, Cambyses' ambition refused to rest. His gaze turned westward, toward a destination steeped in mystery, prestige, and divine power, the Oracle of Amun, hidden deep within the Siwa oasis, far across Egypt's treacherous western desert. The oracle was already a place of legend even in Cambyses' time. Revered across the Mediterranean world, it was said to be a sanctuary of the gods, a place where rulers sought not merely counsel, but legitimacy from the divine itself. Kings, conquerors, and dreamers all believed that the oracle of Amun could grant what no mortal advisor could, the voice of destiny. Many great figures of the ancient world made the pilgrimage to this sacred oracle, among them Alexander the Great, who journeyed to Siwa centuries later in search of divine affirmation of his rule. But for Cambyses, the oracle of Amun represented far more than spiritual curiosity or strategy. To him, seizing the oracle meant dominion over Egypt's soul, a way to subdue not just its lands, but its gods. Capturing the sanctuary would cement his legitimacy as pharaoh, proving that even Egypt's most sacred institutions bowed before Persia's might. Such a conquest would not only consolidate Persian authority, but send a resounding message across the known world that Cambyses was not merely a conqueror of kingdoms, but of divine order itself. And so, driven by this intoxicating vision of power and destiny, Cambyses assembled a vast army, an expedition meant to claim the desert's most mysterious prize, the Oracle of Amun. According to later accounts recorded by the Greek historian Herodotus, Cambyses gathered an astonishing force, some 50,000 men, equipped with horses, provisions, and every necessity for the long journey ahead. It was a colossal undertaking, a feat of logistics and ambition that spoke volumes about Cambyses' determination and the limitless reach of his will. Herodotus described the scale and preparation of this expedition as virtually unparalleled in the ancient world, underscoring just how vital this mission was to the Persian king. To Cambyses, this was not merely a military campaign, it was a statement of imperial destiny, a march to claim divine validation from the gods themselves. Driven by his lust for dominance, Cambyses sought not merely to visit the oracle of Amun, but to annihilate it, a defiant gesture meant to prove that no god, not even Amun himself, could rival the will of a Persian king. To carry out this audacious plan, Cambyses assembled an enormous force of 50,000 soldiers, but he did not lead them personally. Instead, he diverted his own command toward another campaign, an invasion of Ethiopia, leaving the desert-bound army to advance without him. From Thebes, modern-day Luxor, the Persian host set out westward, marching into the vast and merciless sands. The expedition had been meticulously organized, relying on a chain of oases that dotted the Egyptian desert to sustain their journey. After several punishing days beneath the searing sun, the army reached the Karga oasis, a crucial sanctuary along their route. There they replenished their supplies, fresh water, dates, and brief relief beneath the palm shade. Yet beyond Karga lay the true test, a barren expanse where the desert stretched endless and empty, and where no man could survive without the mercy of the gods, Cambyses sought to defy. Before them stretched a vast and merciless wilderness, nearly 200 kilometers, about 124 miles, of shifting sand between them and their ultimate destination, the Siwa Oasis. The region ahead, known today as the Great Sand Sea, remains one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Towering dunes swallowed the horizon, the heat by day was blistering, the nights bit with freezing cold, and water, life itself, was almost nowhere to be found. Even with modern technology, crossing such a landscape would test endurance and faith alike. In the age of Cambyses, it was a near impossible ordeal. Still, the Persian generals pressed onward, driving the men through that pitiless expanse. Under the blazing Egyptian sun, soldiers trudged forward, their armour and weapons weighing heavier with each step. Supplies dwindled, throats burned, and the desert winds scoured both body and spirit. Yet, despite the torment, a single vision sustained them, the legendary oracle of Amun at Siwa. To reach it was to achieve glory beyond measure, and so they marched deeper into the golden void, unaware that the sands themselves were about to become their tomb. What followed remains one of history's most haunting enigmas. According to the ancient historian Herodotus, the entire army, some 50,000 strong, vanished without a trace, as if the desert itself had devoured them. He recounts that as the troops pushed deeper into the wasteland, a savage sandstorm rose without warning, a monstrous wall of wind and dust that blotted out the sun. The storm was relentless, a roaring tempest of sand so fierce that no man, beast, or banner could withstand it. Within hours, the entire force, soldiers, horses, provisions, and weapons, was swallowed whole, entombed beneath dunes that shifted and grew until not a single sign of life remained. Not a single survivor was ever reported to have returned to tell what happened. Herodotus's account captured the imagination of historians, archaeologists, and explorers for centuries, but it also raised many questions. Some scholars believe that Herodotus, writing long after the event, may have relied on second-hand stories or exaggerated local legends, which could have changed the truth of what really happened. Others argue that it seems unlikely for such a large army to disappear completely without leaving any trace. No remains, no weapons, no signs of struggle. Still, the story of Cambyses' lost army has continued to fascinate people. Throughout the 20th century, several archaeological searches were carried out in the Egyptian desert, all hoping to find evidence that could confirm or disprove Herodotus's account. In 2009, excitement flared once more when Italian archaeologists Angelo and Alfredo Castiglione claimed to have made a major discovery near the Siwa oasis. Using satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar, they identified strange patterns beneath the desert surface, formations that looked man-made and possibly concealed ancient remains or artifacts. During their fieldwork, they uncovered scattered bones, fragments of pottery, jewelry, and bronze weapons, which they believed might be the remnants of Cambyses' lost army. The announcement made headlines worldwide, sparking renewed hope that the centuries-old mystery was finally solved. Yet, when other archaeologists examined the evidence, skepticism grew. Critics pointed out that the artifacts were not uniquely Persian, and that the region had long been travelled by traders and nomadic groups, any of whom could have left such remains behind. Geological experts also argued that the desert's shifting sands and harsh climate made it highly unlikely for an entire army to remain hidden and preserved for over 2,500 years. As a result, the mystery of Cambyses' vanished soldiers remains unsolved, still buried somewhere beneath the endless desert dunes. Among the most plausible explanations for the fate of Cambyses' army are several natural causes linked to the desert's extreme conditions. First, suffocation is a likely factor. During a severe sandstorm, the air becomes dense with fine particles that can be inhaled, blocking the respiratory passages. If the sand reaches the lungs, it may cause silicosis, a dangerous condition that leads to inflammation and ultimately death. Second, the intense heat of the Egyptian desert could have led to rapid dehydration. With no access to shade or sufficient water, soldiers exposed to hot winds would have lost body fluids quickly, potentially dying within hours. Third, sandstorms drastically reduce visibility, creating complete disorientation. Lost in a featureless landscape, the soldiers might have wandered off course, unable to find their route to the next oasis, sealing their fate in the endless dunes. Finally, during powerful storms, sand particles travel at tremendous speeds, becoming natural projectiles. These can cause severe injuries, open wounds, and eye damage, which, without proper medical care, could lead to infections and death in the unforgiving desert environment. A different interpretation argues that Herodotus' account might have been symbolic or politically exaggerated, possibly reflecting Egyptian propaganda meant to emphasize the divine protection of the oracle of Amun. From this perspective, the Persian army may have never reached the Siwa oasis at all, perhaps abandoning the campaign midway and dispersing into the desert, with some soldiers returning to Persia and others assimilating into local populations. Such an outcome would leave behind little to no archaeological trace. Despite countless expeditions and modern technological surveys, no definitive evidence has ever been found to confirm what truly happened. The vast western desert of Egypt continues to guard its secrets well, its ever-shifting dunes capable of concealing the truth for millennia, revealing only fragments and whispers of a mystery that refuses to die. Archaeologists and historians continue their search even today, captivated by the enduring mystery of one of antiquity's greatest lost armies. The disappearance of Cambyses' army is more than a historical riddle. It's a testament to the challenges of uncovering truth from the distant past, especially when our knowledge rests on ancient texts and scarce physical remains. Herodotus' account, though influential, was written long after the supposed event and likely drew from local legends, blurring the line between fact and folklore. Yet the historical reality of Cambyses' conquest of Egypt and his planned campaign towards Siwa remains well established. Should future excavations or advanced technologies one day reveal tangible evidence, such as weapons, artifacts, or human remains, it would not only resolve this ancient enigma, but also shed invaluable light on Persian military organization, logistics, and strategy. For now, the fate of Cambyses' army lingers in uncertainty, inspiring new generations of explorers, historians, and dreamers. With every grain of sand shifted by the desert wind, hope persists that the truth still lies buried, waiting to be uncovered beneath Egypt's endless dunes. Under the cold hush of a September night in 1327, the overthrown King Edward II is said to have met a gruesome fate within the shadowed walls of Berkeley Castle in Gloucestershire. Some say he was executed in the most brutal manner imaginable, his screams swallowed by the stone walls. Others whisper he escaped in disguise, trading crown for anonymity, wandering foreign lands as a broken soul. To this day, the truth remains one of England's darkest medieval riddles. Edward's reign had begun with hope, but soon unravelled into chaos. He inherited his throne from Edward I, the warrior king who had subdued Wales and nearly conquered Scotland. But the son lacked the iron will of the father. Where Edward I ruled with fire and strategy, Edward II ruled with emotion and indulgence. He lost the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, a catastrophic defeat that turned the tide of Scottish resistance and shattered his authority. The nobles saw weakness in their king, and weakness in medieval England was blood in the water. Edward's downfall wasn't only forged on battlefields, it brewed in his own court. He surrounded himself with men who adored him, and whom he adored in return. Piers Gaveston, his first and most infamous favourite, dazzled the young king with wit, style and defiance. But his arrogance enraged the nobles, who demanded his death. When Gaveston was executed by their hands, Edward's grief became vengeance, and the cycle began again with another favourite, Hugh Despenser the Younger. Despenser's hunger for power knew no bounds. He seized lands, titles and enemies alike, twisting the royal court into a nest of corruption and fear. The barons rebelled, but the Despensers always returned, protected by Edward's blind devotion. And when Edward's queen, Isabella of France, saw her husband's obsession destroy their kingdom, something within her hardened. Once a loyal consort, she became his most dangerous rival. In 1326, Isabella fled to France, and there she found an unlikely ally, Roger Mortimer, a powerful nobleman and her lover. Together they launched an invasion of England. Their forces swept across the land almost unopposed. By early 1327, Edward was captured, humiliated, and forced to abdicate in favour of his young son, Edward III. He was no longer the King of England. He was now its most inconvenient prisoner. Berkeley Castle became his gilded cage. There, in the damp and silent chambers, Edward was watched, guarded, and, perhaps, tormented. Chroniclers later told stories of his suffering. His food spoiled, his sleep disturbed, his dignity stripped away piece by piece. And then came that fateful night in September. A muffled cry in the dark, the flicker of torchlight, and silence. Officially, Edward II died of natural causes. Unofficially, the rumours spread like wildfire. Some said he was murdered with unspeakable cruelty, a red-hot poker, a crime so grotesque that it would forever haunt his legacy. Others claimed he lived, that he escaped his captors, fled to Italy, and lived quietly as a monk. By the mid-1320s, England was teetering on the edge of collapse. In late 1326, Queen Isabella and her ally, and rumoured lover, Roger Mortimer, launched a daring rebellion from France, determined to dethrone Edward II. They landed on English soil that September with only a modest force, yet their arrival struck the kingdom like a thunderclap. Discontented nobles, weary of Edward's failures and Despenser's tyranny, rallied instantly to Isabella's banner. The king found himself abandoned, his authority dissolving faster than the autumn mist. In a desperate attempt to flee, Edward headed west, seeking sanctuary in Wales, but his luck had long since turned. He was captured while in hiding and brought back in chains. In January 1327, under immense pressure, the fallen monarch was forced to abdicate the throne in favour of his teenage son, the new Edward III, barely 14 years old. From there, the king's life unravelled into shadow. He was moved from fortress to fortress, each transfer meant to foil loyalists who might attempt a rescue. Finally, he was delivered to the isolated Berkeley Castle in Gloucestershire, a grim and lonely place where his fate would be sealed. On the night of September 21st, 1327, the guards at Berkeley announced suddenly that Edward II was dead. No details were offered, no questions allowed. His death was chillingly convenient for the new regime, and for those who had seized power in his name. Within days, word reached the royal court. His body was quickly embalmed, displayed briefly, then buried with ceremony at Gloucester Abbey, denying anyone a chance to inspect it closely. For decades, England accepted the official version, that the deposed king had died quietly in captivity, erased neatly from the chessboard of politics. Yet whispers persisted. When Edward III came of age and took full control in 1330, he turned on his mother's lover, Roger Mortimer, accusing him of orchestrating his father's murder. The official story had been sealed. Edward II was dead, laid to rest in Gloucester Abbey with royal honours. But history, as it so often does, refused to stay buried. Soon after the funeral, uneasy whispers began circulating across England's courtly circles. Something about the king's death didn't sit right. The timing, the secrecy, the speed of his burial, all too convenient, too polished, too political. Then from the shadows of rumour, a darker tale emerged. It was said that the former king had not died quietly at all, but in unspeakable agony. According to chroniclers, his captors had murdered him by thrusting a red-hot iron rod into his body. A method chosen, they claimed, to leave no trace upon the flesh. It was a story designed to horrify. Medieval writers, eager for drama, embellished every grisly detail. For generations, the legend of the red-hot poker would cling to Edward's name, a symbol of cruelty, betrayal, and vengeance. But centuries later, historians began to peel back the myth. The story, they discovered, didn't appear until years after Edward's supposed death. No contemporary records mentioned such torture. The conclusion? It was likely propaganda, a convenient fabrication to blacken the reputation of Roger Mortimer, Isabella's lover and England's temporary ruler. A fiery death made for powerful symbolism. It painted Mortimer as a sadist, a tyrant, and above all, a usurper who would burn a king alive to secure his power. In truth, if Edward was murdered, it was almost certainly quiet, efficient, and unremarkable, a pillow pressed to his face in the dead of night. No spectacle, no witnesses, no proof. And yet, perhaps no murder at all. By 1330, a strange unease had taken root. Lord Berkeley, who had been Edward's jailer, confessed privately that he was never sure the king had died under his watch. At the same time, Archbishop William Melton of York claimed he had received credible intelligence that Edward was still alive, living somewhere far from English soil. Then came the letter, the most extraordinary twist in the entire saga. Written in elegant Latin by Manuele Fieschi, a well-connected priest of Genoa, the message was addressed directly to King Edward III. Fieschi claimed that the former king had escaped from Berkeley Castle, disguised himself as a lowly servant, and fled across the Channel. His journey, if true, had taken him through Ireland, France, and ultimately into Italy, where he had sought forgiveness and lived in penitent seclusion. And Fieschi wasn't just any priest. He belonged to the Fieschi family, a powerful Genoese dynasty with deep connections across Europe. They had produced popes, cardinals, and rulers, men who dealt directly with kings and emperors. For someone of his stature to write such a letter was no trivial act. Some historians see the Fieschi letter as evidence, faint but persistent, that Edward II may have cheated death and lived for many years after his supposed murder. Others dismiss it as a political manoeuvre, perhaps an attempt to curry favour or manipulate the English crown. According to the Italian priest Manuele Fieschi, the story everyone believed was a lie. King Edward II, he claimed, had not been brutally killed at Berkeley Castle. He had escaped. In what became known as the Fieschi letter, written years after the supposed death, the priest described a plan so daring it sounded almost impossible. He wrote, Edward's death had been faked using another man's body, while the true king was quietly smuggled out of England. From there, he wandered through Europe under protection of friends and sympathisers who still remained loyal to him. Eventually, he found peace far from the intrigues of the English crown. living out his days as a humble hermit, seeking forgiveness for his past failures. Fieschi's account even mentioned that the Holy Roman Emperor and senior church officials were aware of Edward's survival, offering him shelter under their watchful eyes. It wasn't the tale of a broken king anymore, it was the tale of a man who had lost everything, yet somehow lived to tell no one. But the story didn't end there. In 1338, a full 11 years after the official report of Edward II's death, his son, King Edward III, travelled to meet the Holy Roman Emperor. During this journey, he was approached by a man who called himself William the Welshman. This mysterious figure claimed to be none other than Edward II himself, the fallen king, the father of the current ruler. No one knows what was said between them. The chronicles offer nothing, only silence. But let's imagine that moment. The young Edward III, then in his mid-20s, standing face to face with a weathered, aging man. Perhaps 50, gaunt and tired, but with the unmistakable presence of royalty in his eyes. Could a son fail to recognize his own father? If he believed it was truly Edward II, what choice did he have but to keep the truth hidden? A living, deposed monarch would have been a dangerous secret, one that could tear the fragile kingdom apart. It's entirely possible that they spoke briefly, father and son, not as kings, but as two men separated by betrayal, politics, and regret. Maybe Edward III forgave him. Maybe he didn't. But when they parted ways, the elder Edward faded once more into the shadows of history. Centuries later, the supposed tomb of Edward II still lies in Gloucester Cathedral, carved from stone, beautiful and serene. Pilgrims visit it, historians debate it, but none can say for sure who truly rests within. In the dusty plains of modern-day Iraq, not far from the legendary Tigris River, lies an artifact that quietly dismantles our assumptions about ancient technological progress. Discovered in 1938 amidst the ruins of a Parthian-era village near Baghdad, the object is deceptively simple, an unassuming clay jar, small enough to cradle in one hand. Its true secret was hidden within. Inside, a copper cylinder was carefully sealed at the base with bitumen, an ancient tar, and within this cylinder sat an iron rod. The arrangement was unmistakable. To the modern eye, the components formed a perfect, if rudimentary, galvanic cell, a battery. Dated to a period between 200 BCE and 200 CE, the so-called Baghdad Battery poses a tantalizing question. Did a civilization millennia ago stumble upon the principles of electrochemistry? The proof is in the function. When scientists filled replica jars with an electrolyte like vinegar or grape juice, substances readily available in antiquity, the devices produced a small but consistent electrical charge, around 1 to 2 volts. It was enough to generate a faint tingle, but not enough to power any meaningful device. This operational proof catapulted the jar from a curious vessel into a historical conundrum. If it was a battery, what was its purpose? The most cited theory is electroplating. A craftsman could have used a series of these cells to deposit a thin veneer of gold or silver onto a less precious metal object, creating gilded artifacts with economic efficiency. Yet this practical explanation is plagued by a significant absence, a conspicuous lack of widely accepted electroplated artifacts from this period. If this was a known technique, why is the archaeological evidence so scarce? This void has given rise to more speculative, yet profoundly intriguing possibilities. Perhaps its use was not industrial, but mystical. In the hands of a temple priest, the battery's subtle shock could have been presented as a manifestation of divine power, a sacred force channeled to inspire awe and reinforce spiritual authority. In this light, electricity would have been a tool of mystery long before it became a utility. Skeptics offer a more mundane alternative. Perhaps the jar was simply a secure storage container for precious scrolls, with the iron and copper acting as protective, non-functional components. The electrical properties, they argue, are merely an astonishing coincidence, but this invites its own question. How could a coincidental arrangement of metals and electrolytes so perfectly mimic a functional electrochemical cell? Perhaps the most captivating aspect of the Baghdad Battery is not the object itself, but the profound philosophical challenge it poses to our worldview. We comfort ourselves with a narrative of linear, cumulative progress, a clear upward trajectory from the stone axe to the silicon chip. This artifact, however, whispers a more complex and disquieting truth, that knowledge is not always preserved, that civilizations can discover and forget, and that the light of understanding can flicker brilliantly in the dark, only to be extinguished for centuries. This notion finds fertile ground in the very place of its discovery. Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, was a landscape where innovation was a constant. This was the culture that gave us the wheel, the first written word, and sophisticated legal codes. In such an environment of intellectual ferment, is it so implausible that a curious artisan, perhaps while experimenting with metals and acidic solutions, stumbled upon a mysterious spirit that could cause a tingle in the hand or a strange sensation on the tongue? They may have never conceptualized electricity, but they could have recognized and sought to harness a novel, unseen force. Yet stripped of its original context and sitting silently in a museum display, the jar offers no answers, only a Rorschach test for our own beliefs. We project our frameworks onto it. The scientist sees a primitive cell, the historian sees a ritual object, and the skeptic sees a scroll case. Its true story is lost to time, making it an empty vessel we fill with our own questions about the past. This is the ultimate power of the Baghdad Battery. It forces us to confront the fragility of knowledge and the arrogance of our assumptions. It stands as a permanent question mark against the timeline of history, a whisper from the ancient world that suggests our map of human ingenuity is incomplete. We are left to wonder, was this a solitary spark of genius that failed to catch fire, a technological path not taken? Or is it a mirror, reflecting our own deep-seated desire to find ourselves, our science, our curiosity, in the eyes of our ancestors? Until new evidence emerges, the Baghdad Battery remains a perfect historical paradox, a simple collection of common materials that, when combined, holds the power to short-circuit our entire understanding of the past. It is a monument not to what we know, but to all that we may never know. Sometime in the late 9th century, a Norse cargo ship, heavy with settlers and their belongings, pushed through the grey Atlantic swells. The Norse ship found its rest on a beach of black glass. Weary Norsemen stepped onto the black sand, their eyes scanning the empty, fertile plains. This was not a raid, but an arrival. They were here to build, not to plunder. The settlers saw a land of green fjords and geothermal steam. The air smelled of cold stone and distant fire. Men of the sea stood before a land of silence and space. They also discovered the island was a harsh but resource-rich environment, naming it Sneyland, Land of Snow, after experiencing heavy snowfall, though it eventually became known as Iceland, after a later settler named Floki. But as they ventured beyond the black sand beaches, exploring the deep fjords and lush valleys, the Norse settlers made a puzzling discovery. The land was empty of permanent settlements. No villages, no fishing wharves, no fields under cultivation. Yet it was not entirely untouched. In a secluded, green-walled valley, they found the remnants of a small crude hut, its sod walls already collapsing in on themselves. On a wind-sheltered ledge overlooking the sea, they uncovered a strange man-made object, a small, finely crafted bell made of bronze, unlike any metalwork they knew. Its tone, when struck, was a high, clear, lonely sound that echoed against the hills. Further searching revealed more ghostly traces. They found the curved wooden staves of what they recognized as a Christian holy man's staff, and most mystifying of all, a handful of fragile pages from a book. The script was a complex, interlaced lettering they knew from trade and raids. Irish. These were not the runes of their own gods, but the words of the Christnir men, the followers of the White Christ. The Norse called these mysterious predecessors the Papa. They were not enemies to be fought, but a riddle written upon the land itself. Why had they come to this remote edge of the world? And why had they left? The bedrock of the Papa legend comes from a handful of medieval texts, like the Icelandic Íslendingabók, Book of the Icelanders, which directly states that when the Norse arrived, they found Christian men, whom the Norsemen called Papa, who later departed, leaving behind relics. The earliest hint of this story, however, comes not from Iceland, but from Ireland itself, in chronicles that tell of monks seeking a desert in the ocean, a solitary place to worship God, far from the world of men. Around the year 825, an Irish monk named Dickwil wrote a book about the geography of the world. In it, he describes other Irish monks living on a northern island around the year 795. He mentions they experienced the midnight sun. While he never says Iceland, his description makes it plausible that Irish monks reached a far northern island long before the Vikings. The first Icelandic source to mention this was written 250 years after the Norse settlement. A historian named Ari the Wise wrote a brief, clear account between 1122 and 1133. He stated that Christian men, called Papa, were already in Iceland when the Norse arrived. He says they left because they didn't want to live with pagans, and they left behind Irish books, bells, and staffs. This story was later repeated in another 12th century book, which confirmed the Papa were from Ireland. However, a closer look shows a problem. The later book likely just copied Ari's story. More importantly, Ari himself may have read Dickwil's old Irish book and used it as the basis for his own story. If that's true, then the entire legend of the Papa in Iceland might not come from multiple sources, but from a single Icelandic historian interpreting a much older, vague Irish text that never even named Iceland. This means the story might be one influential idea that was simply repeated for centuries, rather than a fact confirmed by different pieces of evidence. Even if the historical texts are uncertain, the monks' reason for going to Iceland makes perfect sense. In early medieval Ireland, a powerful spiritual movement called Peregrinatio pro Christo, meaning exile for Christ, inspired monks to leave their homes forever. This wasn't about converting others, it was a radical act of self-sacrifice. They believed that by cutting all ties to family and homeland and going into voluntary exile, they could achieve a purer devotion to God. For these monks, the empty, dangerous North Atlantic was their version of the desert. They were following the example of the early Christian hermits who lived in the Egyptian desert. This spiritual quest led them to set up hermitages on incredibly remote islands and sea cliffs. Sailing all the way to the ultimate isolation of Iceland was the logical end goal of their search for a desert in the ocean. We also know the medieval Irish were capable sailors with the right technology for such a long journey. So, the spiritual motivation provides a strong why, even if it isn't physical proof. The search for physical proof of the Papa has been very difficult. The most logical place to look, an island off the east coast, has only shown evidence of later Norse settlements. The most interesting clues are a series of man-made caves in southern Iceland with simple crosses carved into the walls. Some researchers think the style of the oldest carvings looks similar to Celtic crosses from around 800 AD. However, this is highly speculative. The crosses are too simple to date accurately, and the caves were used for centuries, so they could have been made by anyone, including later Norse Christians. Even place names like Pape, Island of the Papa, are unreliable. The Norse settlers who named these places already knew the word Papa from Ireland and Scotland. They might have just given that name to a place that looked like where a monk would live, even if none ever actually did. The traditional story, written by later Christian Icelanders, says the Papa packed up and left because they didn't want to live with pagan Vikings. This story may have been told to make the virtuous Irish monks seem more spiritually pure than the Norse settlers' own pagan ancestors. But other, simpler explanations are just as likely. They died out. A small, all-male, celibate community cannot sustain its population. Without new members joining from Ireland, they would have simply gone extinct within a generation or two, possibly even before the main wave of Norse settlers arrived. It's also possible that some of these Irish monks didn't leave. They could have stayed and blended into the new Norse society, which already included Christians from the British Isles, some willing converts, and others who were enslaved. These remaining monks might have felt it was their duty to provide spiritual comfort to these fellow Christians in a new land. Finally, while the old stories say the monks left peacefully, we know that Viking encounters with Christians were often violent. We can't ignore the possibility of conflict, forced removal, or even the monks being killed. The community was likely very small, so a single Viking raid could have wiped them out. If this happened, the later Christian Icelanders would have had little reason to record that their own ancestors destroyed a holy community. In summary, the story of the Papa exists in a grey area between fact and legend. We know the Irish monks had both the spiritual motivation and the sailing skill to reach Iceland, but the physical proof is missing, and the written accounts were created much later by Christians who may have wanted to give their nation a more virtuous Christian origin story. In this version, the brief pagan period was just a short interruption before Iceland returned to its true Christian destiny. Until new archaeological evidence is found, the mystery of the Papa, what really happened when the Norse arrived, will remain unsolved. In the sun-scorched heart of Egypt, in a valley dedicated to eternity, the sands hold their secrets close. For centuries, the Valley of the Kings whispered the names of mighty pharaohs, Ramses, Seti, Amenhotep. But one name was a ghost, a whisper of a whisper, erased so completely it was as if he never was. Tutunkhamun. His reign was short, his power questionable, his legacy seemingly insignificant. And yet, today, his golden mask is the face of ancient Egypt. How did this boy, lost to time, become its most immortal icon? The answer lies not in the glory of his life, but in the profound mystery of his death and the chilling perfection of his tomb. This is the story of the king who was meant to be forgotten, and the curse and blessing that ensured he would be remembered forever. To understand the mystery of Tutunkhamun, we must first step back into an Egypt gripped by revolution. The pharaoh Akhenaten, believed to be Tut's father, had torn the religion of the land apart. He abandoned the pantheon of gods, their temples, their priests, and declared there was only one deity to worship, the sun disk, the Aten. In an act of profound change, he moved the capital to a new city built from scratch in the desert. He even changed his own name to Akhenaten, the effective spirit of the Aten, and when his son was born, he named him Tutunkhamun, the living image of the Aten. The boy was born into a world of radical, and for many, terrifying change. But revolutions built by one man often die with him. Around 1336 BC, Akhenaten died. The throne of this fractured kingdom passed to a child, a boy of just 9 years old. The weight of two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, now rested on the shoulders of Tutunkhamun. What must it have been like to be a child king, surrounded by powerful advisors and priests who remembered the old ways? It seems the boy pharaoh, or those who guided him, made a calculated decision. To save Egypt, they would restore it. Tutunkhamun turned his back on his father's god. He abandoned the desert capital and returned power to the religious hub of Thebes. In a powerful symbolic act, he changed his name, stripping away the Aten and replacing it with Amun, the chief god of the old pantheon. He was no longer Tutunkhamun, he was Tutunkhamun, the living image of Amun. His throne name, Nebkeh-Perura, was a nod to the ancient sun god, Re. The counter-revolution was complete. He married Ankhesenamun, his half-sister, a daughter of Akhenaten, and the legendary Queen Nefertiti. They tried to build a dynasty, but tragedy followed them. Within his tomb, archaeologists would find the mummified remains of two tiny fetuses, their stillborn daughters. For 9 years, Tutunkhamun ruled. His reign was, by all historical accounts, unremarkable. Was he a passionate leader, or merely a puppet? A boy whose name was signed to decrees by the true powers in the shadows? The evidence suggests the latter. His name began to quietly disappear from monuments. It was as if the kingdom was already trying to forget the son of the heretic king, Akhenaten. And then, around the age of 18 or 19, Tutunkhamun died. His death was shockingly abrupt. So abrupt that his final resting place wasn't even a royal tomb fit for a pharaoh. He was buried in a small, cramped, unfinished chamber, likely intended for a courtier. The paintings on the wall were applied to a thin layer of plaster, not carved into the stone, as was customary for kings. His burial was a rushed, hasty affair. Why? How does a young king in the prime of his life die so suddenly that there's no proper place to put him? Theories have swirled for a century. Was it murder? A blow to the head? A poisoning? Did he fall from his chariot during a hunt? His chest crushed in a terrible accident? Modern science has entered the fray. Peering through the wrappings with digital imaging and DNA testing, the clues are tantalizing and conflicting. He had a broken leg, he had malaria, he was frail with a clubfoot and may have walked with canes. Over 130 were found in his tomb. But which of these killed him? Did a fall from a chariot compound a pre-existing condition? Did a broken leg, infected, combine with a malarial fever to create a perfect storm that felled the young king? Or was there a more sinister hand at play? The mystery of his death is the first great enigma of Tutunkhamun, and the second is what happened next. In death, the campaign to erase Tutunkhamun was a success. His successors scrubbed his name from the records. To the world he vanished, but this erasure became his salvation. While the grand tombs of the great pharaohs were looted over the centuries, their treasures stolen, Tutunkhamun's modest tomb was overlooked. The entrance was buried by debris from later excavations, by flash floods, and by time itself. He wasn't just forgotten, he was sealed away. For over 3,200 years he slept, until a stubborn English archaeologist named Howard Carter, fueled by a single-minded belief, began to dig. His patron, Lord Carnarvon, was losing patience and money. The Valley of the Kings was thought to be exhausted, but Carter was sure, one tomb remained, that of the lost King Tutunkhamun. In November 1922, Carnarvon gave him one last season, and on November 4th, a water boy stumbled on a stone step, a staircase leading down to a sealed doorway. Carter sent a famous telegram, "At last have made wonderful discovery in valley, a magnificent tomb with seals intact." But that wasn't entirely true. The seals were intact, but they were seals of restoration. The tomb had been broken into long ago, but the robbers were caught. The tomb was resealed and then forgotten. Only small items were taken. The greatest treasure was left behind. What emerged from the gloom was a vision from another world. Gilded couches shaped like monstrous animals, alabaster vases of unguents, dismantled chariots, a throne of breathtaking beauty. It was organized chaos, a treasure crammed into a tiny antechamber. It took Carter 10 years to catalogue the over 5,000 objects. But the true heart of the mystery lay behind another sealed door, guarded by 2 life-sized statues of the king himself. This was the burial chamber. Inside, they found the king himself, enshrined within a series of golden coffins, nested like a Russian doll. The innermost coffin was solid gold, weighing over 200 pounds. On his head was the magnificent golden mask, the serene face that has become the symbol of ancient Egypt itself. And on his feet they found golden sandals, bearing the images of his enemies. Even in death, the king was prepared to trample his foes for all eternity. But with the discovery came a dark legend. Lord Carnarvon died mere months after entering the tomb from an infected mosquito bite. The press sensationalized it as the curse of the pharaoh. Was it coincidence? Or was there an ancient microbial vengeance sealed within the tomb, waiting for a breath of fresh air? So, what do we really know about King Tut? We know he was a boy, thrust into a broken kingdom, used as a tool to restore the old order. We know he died young and mysteriously. and we know that the very act of forgetting him preserved him for the ages. He was a minor king in life, but in death he became the greatest teacher of his culture. His tomb was a time capsule, offering an unparalleled window into the life, death, and religion of the pharaohs. The unremarkable king became the most remarkable discovery. The mystery is not fully solved. We may never know the exact circumstances of his death, but perhaps that is fitting. The boy who was erased now lives forever in our imagination, not as a powerful ruler, but as a silent golden enigma, forever young, forever mysterious, beckoning us from the shadows of his golden mask to wonder and to discover more. Some mysteries are locations, but the most intimate are objects. They are puzzles of purpose, crafted by hands long turned to dust. Their function is a ghost, their story a void we long to fill. Across the faded borders of the Roman Empire, a silent enigma has endured the collapse of legions, the slow grind of centuries, and the relentless appetite of decay. These objects have outlasted everything, only to confront us with a riddle that has, so far, proven immortal. One specific artifact emerges from the soil of Roman Europe with tantalizing frequency, a ghost from the archaeological record that appears everywhere and nowhere at once. And despite its widespread discovery, its true purpose remains one of history's most stubborn secrets. Lurking in the archived drawers of European museums, gracing the quiet shelves of private collectors, and occasionally startling a farmer or metal detectorist who turns one up from the mud, lies a small, heavy mystery. Crafted from bronze, or sometimes even stone, its form is unnervingly precise. It is a dodecahedron, a shape of 12 identical pentagonal faces, each meeting at perfect sharp angles to create a mesmerizingly complex solid. But this is no abstract geometric exercise. At each of its 20 vertex sits a rounded knob, like a blunt sensor or a stabilizing foot. And most intriguingly, the center of every face is pierced by a hole, each circle meticulously crafted to a different diameter. There are no inscriptions to decode, no ritualistic markings, no scratches of practical use, just an overwhelming silent symmetry. With over 120 specimens recovered from the damp soils of northern England to the sunken foundations of Hungarian forts, from the vineyards of France to the Alpine passes of Switzerland, a distinct pattern emerges. These dodecahedra are found solely in the western provinces of the empire, never in its Italian heartland. They are always discovered in isolation, divorced from the context of workshops, graves, or temples. Most haunting of all is the complete absence from the vast written and artistic legacy of Rome. In an empire built on bureaucracy, engineering, and legal documentation, an object of such sophistication and apparent value has left not a single whisper in any surviving scroll, ledger, mosaic, or fresco. This profound silence is what elevates the Roman dodecahedron from a mere curiosity to a haunting artifact. For a civilization defined by its practicality and its relentless documentation of daily life, these objects are a glaring anomaly. They defy categorization. Were they so mundane that no one thought to write them down? Or were they so profoundly secret, their function known only to a select few, that their purpose was deliberately kept from the historical record? Their very existence challenges our perception of Rome, suggesting there were currents of knowledge, ritual, or craft flowing beneath the surface of its history, leaving behind only these beautiful, inscrutable, and silent puzzles cast in metal and stone. Scholars have proposed a range of practical theories to explain these enigmatic objects. One prevailing hypothesis suggests they were sophisticated measuring devices, perhaps a handheld solar gauge used to calculate optimal sowing dates. According to this idea, the varying hole sizes could have projected specific patterns of sunlight onto a surface, marking the changing seasons for agricultural planning. Other researchers argue for a more mechanical purpose. Could they have been used to calibrate the ropes of Roman artillery, to size standard water pipes, or even as a frame for knitting gloves? Some see them as ornate candle holders, surveying tools, or encrypted military signaling devices. Each of these practical explanations carries a certain logic, yet each is also fraught with contradictions. For instance, many dodecahedra have been discovered in graves or near sacred sites, contexts far removed from workshops or battlefields. Their craftsmanship implies precision, yet no two are identical in dimension or detail. Some have ridged holes, others are smooth. Some show signs of wear, while others appear pristine. This inconsistency has led other voices toward more esoteric interpretations. The dodecahedron's 12-faced form held profound symbolic weight in Platonic philosophy, where it represented the cosmos or the very fabric of the heavens. From this perspective, the objects may not have been tools at all, but rather cosmic models, spiritual talismans, or sacred instruments used in secretive rites. Perhaps they were devices for divination, where a priest or initiate would read meaning from the patterns of light and shadow cast by the sun through the carefully angled holes. Beyond these, more speculative theories push the boundaries further. Some propose the dodecahedra were rudimentary astronomical calculators, a simplified version of the Antikythera mechanism, used to track celestial cycles for both religious observance and agricultural necessity. This idea, while captivating, lacks the intricate gearing found in its famed Greek counterpart, leaving the theory lingering in the realm of fascinating possibility. The enigma of the dodecahedron pushes some researchers beyond the practical and into the metaphysical. They proposed that these objects were not tools in any conventional sense, but vessels of sacred geometry, their 12 faces and precise angles designed to resonate with the fundamental harmonics of the universe. In this view, they were talismans to channel metaphysical forces, existing in a space where what we now call science and superstition were indivisible. Pushing the boundaries of speculation even further, some argue they are not Roman inventions at all, but physical memories of a lost pre-Roman civilization. Their theory suggests the dodecahedron is an archetypal shape, a forgotten symbol whose original meaning had faded, leaving only the compelling, empty form to be reproduced by Roman craftsmen who no longer understood its power. Yet after all the theories, the core truth is disarmingly simple. We are still in the dark. There is a profound and haunting humility in this realization. In an era where we can sequence ancient DNA and map buried cities from orbit, a small, cold, bronze artifact from a well-studied empire remains stubbornly inscrutable. Its silence is more powerful than any answer could be. This silence suggests several profound possibilities. Perhaps its purpose was never meant to be public. It was a piece of esoteric knowledge, a secret held by a mystery cult or a guild of artisans, its true function dying with the last initiate. The very need for secrecy would explain its absence from all public records and art. Conversely, the ultimate irony may be that the dodecahedron was something utterly mundane. It could have been a rich child's toy, a game piece, a loom weight, or a gauge for a commodity so common that explaining its use would have been as unnecessary as writing down the purpose of a spoon. Its mystery, then, is an accident of history, born from the fact that the most obvious things are often the first to be forgotten. The Roman dodecahedron, therefore, teaches us a subtle lesson about the fragility of knowledge. Some mysteries are not lost in fiery collapses or violent conquests, but in the quiet, mundane passage of time. They vanish because a generation failed to pass on a piece of information they considered too trivial to mention. The object now sits in its museum case, a perfect, polished question mark. It challenges our arrogance, reminding us that a civilization we have mapped in such detail still holds pockets of perfect darkness. The dodecahedron is a ghost in the machine of history, a silent guardian of a secret that may have been, in the end, either too sacred or too simple to ever be written down. Beneath the sun-scorched plateaus of central Anatolia, Turkey, Cappadocia conceals a secret world. From the surface, it appears as a dreamscape, shaped by the hands of giants, a sprawling expanse of stone spires, undulating valleys, and cliffs pocked with ancient caves. This is a land carved not just by time, but by the elements themselves, where soft volcanic tuff has been worn away into surreal forms over millennia. But the true marvel of Cappadocia is not the fairy tale landscape above. It is the world that lies beneath it. Hidden deep below the earth, under modern villages and vineyards, are immense subterranean cities, carved by human hands hundreds of feet down. Derinkuyu, Kaymaklı, Özkonak, Mazı, Tatlarin. These are names known to locals, yet mysteries to the outside world. Each one is a vast labyrinth, a self-contained ecosystem of survival. They are not simple caves, but engineered marvels with sophisticated ventilation shafts that breathe fresh air into the deepest chambers, intricate water wells that tapped into underground sources, and massive circular stone doors weighing half a ton that could seal off entire passages from the inside against any threat. Within these dark, cool layers, life flourished in the depths. There were stables for livestock, pressing rooms for wine and oil, communal kitchens, schools, and places of worship carved into the soft rock. Some, like Derinkuyu, plunge as deep as 18 stories, a vertiginous descent into a hidden history that could shelter tens of thousands of people for months at a time. And perhaps the most compelling mystery of all is that nobody knows for certain who first built them. Their origins are lost to time. The hidden city of Derinkuyu was uncovered by sheer accident in 1963. It began when a local resident, in the simple act of renovating his home, knocked down a seemingly ordinary wall. Behind it lay not more earth, but a dark, narrow tunnel that exhaled the cool, still air of centuries. Driven by curiosity, he ventured inside. The single passage soon branched into an intricate labyrinth of intersecting corridors, descending stairways and mysterious chambers that spiraled deeper into the earth. With each new turn, the scale of his discovery became more immense. It quickly became apparent that this was far more than a forgotten cellar or a simple storage room. He had accidentally unsealed the entrance to a massive, multi-level underground city, a sophisticated subterranean world that had been lost to time, silently waiting beneath the very foundations of the modern town. Derinkuyu is now recognized as the largest excavated underground city in the world, a staggering subterranean metropolis engineered to sustain a population of 20,000 people or more, complete with their livestock, food supplies, and the entire infrastructure of their society. Its labyrinthine depths contain not just tunnels and rooms, but the very organs of a community. Dedicated chapels for worship, a baptismal pool for spiritual rites, sprawling wine presses, communal kitchens still marked by soot, and a masterful 180-foot ventilation shaft that still draws fresh air from the surface with remarkable efficiency. The existence of such a place forces us to confront profound questions. How was a project of this magnitude even possible with the technology of the time? The carving of this network would have consumed countless thousands of man-hours and required not just brute force, but sophisticated architectural and geological understanding. This leads to the ultimate question: what powerful, compelling reason could drive a people to undertake such a monumental task, to literally move their entire world underground? The most widely accepted answer is as simple as it is dire: security. The Cappadocian Plateau, while beautiful, was a crossroads and a battleground. Its history is a chronicle of successive invasions, from the legions of Rome and the armies of Byzantium to the swift cavalry of Arabs and the relentless hordes of Mongols. For centuries, this windswept plateau served as a corridor for conquering armies, a crossroads where empires clashed. It believed that early Christians, relentlessly persecuted by the Roman Empire, sought sanctuary in these labyrinthine depths. They perfected the city's defences, crafting entrances hidden within plain sight, through unassuming floor holes in surface dwellings, or within narrow, natural-looking crevices. Their most iconic innovations were the massive circular stone doors, immense millstones that could be rolled into place from the inside, blocking critical passageways with a final resounding thud against the stone. However, the presence of these Christians is merely the most recent layer in a far deeper enigma. The true origins of these subterranean worlds are buried in a much more distant past, predating Christianity by over 1,000 years. Archaeological analysis of the earliest, deepest levels points to their creation as far back as 2000 BCE, in the era of the Hittite Empire, possibly, with some speculation about even more ancient, unknown hands having broken the initial ground. And the deeper archaeologists delve, the more the mystery intensifies. This is not a collection of isolated hideouts, but a vast, interconnected metroplex. Tunnels stretch for miles, forming a subterranean highway that linked massive population centres like Derinkuyu to other cities such as Kaimakli. Some of these vertiginous shafts plunge so deep into the Earth's crust that modern expeditions, equipped with advanced technology, remain wary of their stability and hesitant to explore their full extent. The logistical puzzles are as profound as the engineering ones. There is no consensus on how they solved the fundamental problems of underground life. How are these pitch-black chambers lit without filling them with suffocating smoke? How are the ventilation shafts engineered to provide such a consistent flow of fresh air to levels 18 stories down? How was human waste managed for a population of thousands to prevent disease in such a confined, sealed environment? Perhaps the most baffling aspect of all lies in the stone itself. The builders worked in volcanic tuff, a rock soft enough to be carved with primitive tools, yet notoriously brittle and unstable. This was a constant life or death gamble. Any miscalculation, a support column placed too far apart, a ceiling carved too thin, the subtle angle of an arch, could have, and likely did in some places, trigger a sudden and catastrophic collapse, burying entire sections of the city in an instant. Yet the conventional explanations leave many questions unanswered. In the absence of definitive proof, alternative researchers have proposed more speculative theories. Some suggest these subterranean worlds were designed as shelters from global cataclysms, devastating solar flares, a great flood, or even a poisoned atmosphere. More radical hypotheses propose that the cities were not built by human hands at all, but by a lost civilization possessing a mastery of geology and engineering that rivals, or even surpasses, our own modern knowledge. The evidence they point to is undeniably sophisticated. The ventilation shafts are a marvel of precision, perfectly aligned to create a natural airflow that regulates temperature and oxygen across dozens of levels. There are even acoustic peculiarities, certain walls and passages that channel sound, allowing a whisper to travel clearly from one chamber to another while remaining a secret everywhere else. Was this a feature of military strategy or something more enigmatic? Local legends only deepen the mystery. Folktales speak of the fairy chimneys above and claim the land was once inhabited by giants and spirits who retreated underground to escape a fire from the sky. Other stories describe subterranean cities of light, where beings could see without torches and communicate without sound. Is this mere folklore, or could it be a distorted echo of a history we have long forgotten? Derinkuyu is not an isolated phenomenon. Over 200 such complexes are scattered across Cappadocia, with fewer than 10% having been fully excavated. What secrets lie behind the countless collapsed corridors and deliberately blocked tunnels? The greatest puzzle remains their abandonment. There is no evidence of a violent end, no signs of battle, mass graves, or fire. It is as if the entire population simply walked away. Perhaps they migrated to the surface for good. Perhaps a silent plague forced them out. Or perhaps they were only ever temporary residents, waiting for a threat to pass. And when it finally did, they sealed the doors behind them, never needing to return to the darkness. Today, tourists wander through the small, open sections of Derinkuyu and Kaimakli, marvelling at the ancient staircases and cramped living quarters. But the vast majority of this underground world remains untouched and unexplored, sealed beneath modern towns like a time capsule waiting for its key. With every new discovery, the timeline seems to stretch back further and the engineering appears more complex. Imagine the English countryside in the 12th century, not the green and pleasant land of later poetry, but a place of deep woods, scattered settlements, and a world that ended at the edge of the known forest. In Suffolk, the village of Woolpit, its name a literal echo of wolf pits, those traps dug for predators, was such a place. Life was dictated by the soil and the seasons, and the horizon was close. Then, something impossible happened. According to the chronicles of two respected historians of the age, William of Newburgh and Ralph of Coggeshall, reapers working the fields near the pits found two children, a boy and a girl. They were alone, terrified, and huddled together. But it was their appearance that struck a deep primal fear into the hearts of the villagers. Their skin was green. This was not the pallor of sickness, but a vivid, startling green, the colour of tarnished copper or young leaves in a deep shade. Their clothing too was strange, garments made from an unknown material, of a cut and colour no one recognised. When the villagers approached, the children spoke in a language that was a cascade of unfamiliar, melodic sounds. They were utterly alien. They were brought to the local landowner, Sir Richard de Calne. The children were offered bread, meat and ale, but they refused all food, growing weaker. It was only when someone brought in freshly cut beanstalks, the raw green plants still glistening, that they fell upon them ravenously. It was all they would eat. As weeks turned to months, the strangeness began to fade. Their green skins slowly softened to a more human tone. They began to learn English, their words clumsy at first, then more confident, and with the language came a story that has echoed for 8 centuries. The girl, who was the more articulate of the two, explained that they came from a place called St. Martin's Land. It was a world of perpetual twilight, where the sun never truly rose, and the light was diffused in a soft green glow, as if filtered through a great canopy. The people there, she said, were all the same green as they had been. They were not subterranean, but they lived in a land without a direct sun. She and her brother had been tending their father's flocks when they heard a sound described as a beautiful, irresistible chiming, like bells carried on the wind. They followed it, entering a vast, echoing cavern. For what felt like an age, they walked toward the sound in the darkness until they saw a brilliant, painful light. Stumbling out, they found themselves in the wolf pit in Woolpit, the blinding sun of our world assaulting their eyes, the reapers' voices a harsh and frightening noise. They were trapped here. The boy, sadly, grew despondent and sickly. He died not long after their arrival, leaving his sister alone in our world. The girl, whose name was never recorded, thrived. She lost her green colour completely, learned English fluently, was baptised, and eventually married a man from King's Lynn. She lived a long life, but the chroniclers note she was often considered rather loose and wanton in her conduct, a hint that she never fully internalised the social norms of her new home. This is where history ends and mystery begins. What were the green children? The most accepted explanation is that they were Flemish orphans. During the reign of King Stephen, there was significant persecution of Flemish immigrants in the region. Their strange language was likely Dutch. Their green skin could have been chlorosis, a severe iron deficiency anemia, exacerbated by a diet that, before their discovery, may have been limited to whatever foraged greens they could find. The land of St. Martin could have been Fornham St. Martin, a village with a strong Flemish community nearby. The cavern could have been the dense, twilight-filled forest of Thetford Warren, and the bells could have been those from the Abbey of Bury St. Edmunds. They may have been lost, traumatised, and their story a child's confused allegory for their journey. The story ticks every box of a fairy tale. Green is the colour of the fair folk, the Sidhe, the otherworldly beings who live in hollow hills in a timeless twilight realm. They are often lured by bells, cannot eat our food, hence their initial refusal, and their integration into human society is a common motif. The girls reported wanton behaviour aligns with folkloric fears that these otherworldly beings lack human morals. For those who look beyond, the tale is irresistible. A subterranean world, a parallel dimension where physics and light work differently. Were they extraterrestrials? Their green skin a result of a different biology? Their land of St. Martin? A ship or a base? The tunnel they described is the classic trope of a portal. The truth is, we will never know. The power of the green children of Woolpit lies not in a solution, but in the haunting, enduring image they left behind. Two lost, green-skinned children, stepping from a perpetual twilight into the harsh light of our world, bringing with them a secret they could never fully convey. They are a permanent crack in the wall of our reality,